Karen is introducing.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to our last session of the weekend. For those of you who don't know Michael, I can say a few words about him as a longtime friend. Michael and I have known each other since 1980, and so we go way back. And I have great appreciation and gratitude to Michael for the many roles that he has played over all these decades. First of all, he's a friend, as I mentioned, and he's a friend to so many people. As a chef, and maybe you're familiar with his book that he wrote to describe his experience being Krishnamurti's chef for a few decades, and then also he was this chef at Oak Grove School when it first opened in '75. So as a chef, he also, while he was standing in the kitchen, people would visit him and he would tell stories. And as a politician or someone interested in history, you'd always go, well, Michael, would you explain the situation in what's going on in, Tanzania right now? And he'd go, yes. And he'd go back and he'd know off the top of his head, he'd know what was the history of Tanzania. And he could tell you the story pretty much about any country on the planet. So he's an author and a historian also, and a storyteller. And he adds so much color to a story or a situation through his vivid language and his personal experience, because he's also a world traveler. Michael's been everywhere on the planet, so he has all these anecdotes about places where he's visited. So as a friend, storyteller, author, chef, world traveler, he's also a seeker and a philosopher who has appreciated when he finally discovered Krishnamurti. It was like, oh, thank God. There's somebody who's saying something that makes sense, and that was back in the 70s. So we go way back to Michael's first meeting of Krishnamurti in 1970, early 70, maybe 71. 71. So ever since then, he's traveled to all the schools, and he's such a critical participant at this campus as the campus librarian and support staff for everything that goes on here. Michael, also, maybe you don't know this, he's a poet. He writes poetry all the time, and he can recite poems of others. And he's also an artist in, what he can do with a pack of those little flare markers. What do you call them?
Well, filter pens.
Yeah, okay. What he can create on a sheet of paper, these geometric figures, and it's incredible. So he wears many hats. And
thank you.
It's remarkable to just see how art and creativity have blossomed in your life.
Thank you.
And thank you for talking with everyone today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And
thank
congratulations, Michael. His book just got republished.
Second printing.
Because it's out of print, this copy. So it's a smaller book, unfortunately, the new one. But it's still a lovely something to cherish. Okay.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. So, wow, that's quite an introduction. I don't know if I can live up to that or not. And, well, first of all, thank you all for coming. And I mean, I anticipated, since it's the last session, that and I'm competing with a real poet called Siddharth, who was mentioned, of course, by Heinrich Hesse, And anyways, and the sun is shining. That's, of course, another thing to be remarked on this occasion. Plus, of course, for all of you who are mothers, happy Mother's Day. Yeah, you're welcome. And so I was asked to do a little presentation, and of course the title of this whole weekend meeting, our annual gathering here, is Insights into Education. Now, I was here, so I heard a lot of the presentations. I could take part in that, and I admired, what came out, and so I like to be a little bit out of the ordinary and true to the image that Karen painted of me. I will be very personal. But of course, since it's very personal, I'll also invariably have to include Krishnamurti, not only because we are here, but also because he was probably the most, other than my mother, he was probably the most important influence, if I can call it that, or maybe not even influence, inspiration in my life, and changed my life dramatically, because I came here in 1975 when the school started, and worked as the chef at the school. And when Krishnamurti came, and he would usually come each year and stay for 3 months on this property, I would then switch over and be his chef while he was here. And that, of course, gave the whole thing a very, very different flavor. Particularly also, since I wasn't a trained chef, I had to learn on the job. So in the beginning, it caused me some nervousness, particularly cooking for Krishnamurti. And I thought, what if I poisoned the poor man? That would be very, dramatic indeed. So anyways, but I had very good teachers, namely Alan and Helen Hooker, who started and owned the Ranch House restaurant, who was the #1 restaurant in town for 50 years or more, and it still is in existence, even though a lot has changed, menu and pricing and so on. But they, in essence, were my teachers, so that helped a lot, and I was able to go on with it for 11 years. And of course, by that time, 1986, Krishnamurti passed away, and then that was, sort of the main reward of doing that job, to be in contact with Krishnamurti, And that's the book that I wrote subsequently recounts my impression of Krishnamurti in daily life. And I'd just like to tell you, excuse me, when you see me coughing like this, I got a little bit of a sore throat, so this may happen every once in a while, so bear with me. So there were a number of things that I discovered about Krishnamurti that is not immediately apparent. And one that was such a surprise was, well, for one, he was a very modest person, very unassertive, but also he had a great sense of humor. He liked to laugh. He liked to tell jokes. And that was just marvelous. And every once in a while, that comes through in some of his talks. You may have heard some of his talks, where he actually tells the jokes or gets into laughter. But most of the people that I ever talked with who had heard him speak, they often had an impression of a very stern, austere people, and some people even thought he was angry, which of course is a bit of an exaggeration. He wasn't angry really, but he was passionate, let's put it that way, very passionate. So on the topic of education, as you probably have heard on some of these occasions, some of these events, he had a great interest in education, and of course he founded all these schools, the one here, Oak Grove School, which started here on this property, with 2 or 3 students, and there were no buildings over there. And then the construction started, and after a year, the whole operation was moved over there. But just apropos the structure here, I don't know, some of you may know this, but I don't know if you're interested in this. But for quite some time, for about almost 15 or more years, this property and the school property had been under litigation, And during that time, Krishnamurti usually resided in Malibu and was hosted by a lady called Mary Zimbalist, very generous lady and a outstanding lady, very elegant, very, very, very dedicated, and so on, very bright, and a trustee, But she was the widow of a famous filmmaker, Sam Zimbalist, who did Ben-Hur. The famous film was Ben-Hur, and actually she had an Oscar, the original Oscar that she received on her dead husband's behalf. She had it standing up on top of the shelf in the office, which is now the bookstore office. So had you come at that time, you could have seen an actual Oscar. So this was Mary Zimbalist, and then when it came to a settlement about this property, and not only the property here, which is 11 acres, but also the school property at the other end, 8 miles from here, which is about 140 acres, I think. Then Krishnaji decided he wanted to start a school, the Oak Grove School. And at that time, Mary asked him, would you prefer to continue living in Malibu at her house there, right on Pacific Coast Highway, or would he prefer living here? Well, he chose here because it was close to the school. His brother had died here many years earlier, and I guess Ojai was his first real residence in California and America, and so she was well off, and she was, as I said, so dedicated to him that she commissioned a top-notch architect by the name of Charles Moore from Los Angeles. He was a postmodernist, to design this structure here, because if you were to look out the window, the old part of the house, which is a wooden clapboard structure, that goes back to the early 1900s, and Krishnaji and his brother came to live there in 1922. So she added this much larger part here, and a lot of it was really, Charles Moore designed it, as I said, but she made a lot of the decision about the color combination. As you can see, there's a predominance of white color, or if you look at the tiles, well, she lived with her husband for the making of Ben-Hur. She lived in Italy for 2 years or more, and she liked Italian art, so she brought these tiles from Italy, hand-painted tiles, and so it took about a year, just under a year, for this house to be completed with adobe bricks. And then she sold her house in Malibu, and this became both her house and Krishnamurti's house when he came, And of course, this room here was specifically designed for the purpose of larger meetings, because Krishnaji would meet with the staff, school staff, teachers, trustees. He would meet here in this room, you know. And also, actually, in fact, there are some video recordings where you can see that he is, you know, it's just happening right here in this room, you know. So there's a lot of history here and so on, if you want to call it that way. In fact, that was an interesting feature that I'd just like to mention to you very briefly, which is that Krishnaji sometimes would mention that a structure, a house, would retain some of the vibrations that occurred in the house, you know. And oops. And as an example, he said, you know, imagine a house where a murder occurred, you know, very sinister, dark thing, right? Well, if you were to go into that house and you were somewhat sensitive, you probably, you may not immediately say, oh, a murder occurred here, but you would feel a little depressed, or you would get the sense of this dark happening there in that space, you know. And there are other events like that where Krishnaji, oh yeah, okay, I'll tell you another one, since, I mean, this is very casual, right? So I can tell you all the stories. So this man Friedrich Grohe, you may have heard his name, he came from the Grohe family, the bathroom fixture company from Switzerland and Germany. He came from that family, very wealthy. He heard of Krishnamurti just when he had retired, and being a fairly wealthy millionaire and whatnot, wanted to start a school along Krishnamurti's line in Switzerland. And Krishnaji said, well, you know, we already have a school in Brockwood Park. Why didn't you have a look at that? And so Friedrich said, okay, yeah, I'll have a look. And then he liked Brockwood Park and decided to support that. And then, in fact, he financed the construction of the new adult center there, you know, which cost, I don't know, $2, $3, $5 million or what. And so, but here's the story apropos the vibration. So at one point, Friedrich came here, and he had been married before. He had 2 sons, but he met a lady here. I don't want to mention her name and go into that, but he met a lady here that he fell in love with and that he married. And then he bought a house here, right next to the, if you know Ojai a little bit, there's the Ojai Valley Inn, you know, top notch, you know, I mean, like, it's, I think, $500 minimum for a room a night, you know, and so on. So he bought a property there for this lady, and it was very nice. I've been there several times, and on one occasion, he invited Krishnamurti there and so on. And then, so on one occasion when Friedrich came here for lunch, Krishnaji asked him, how's your house doing? And he said, yeah, it's really quite nice. But there's this one room, it has a funny kind of vibration, you know. And Krishnamurti said, okay, let me take care of that, you know. So sometime later, a few days later, Krishnaji went to Friedrich's house and said, show me the room. He showed him the room. Okay, he said, just step outside, I'll take care of it. And so the door was closed. Krishnaji, so we don't really know what he did, you know, but he did something in the room, which he's done on other occasions. I got to tell you that Mary Zimbalist described that also. And so a couple of days later, Friedrich again came to lunch, and Krishnamurti asked him, well, what's the room like? Is it better? And Friedrich sort of said, somewhat hesitantly, yeah, I think it's better, but I'm not really sure. You know, it may just be imagination, you know. And Krishnaji said, yeah, that's maybe true too. So Krishnamurti had many sides to him that often only manifested in a very more casual environment among friends, when he was relaxed or talking about movie, he would ask, any good movies recently? And Mary and Erna Lillifeld, another trustee, took him to E.T. one afternoon in Ventura. And he liked the film. Oh yeah. The next day he said, oh, it was really wonderful. This E.T. character, wow, what a guy, And then Erna Lillifeld said, well, you are E.T., Krishnaji. And he laughed.
You know why E.T.'s eyes are so big?
No.
He saw his phone bill.
Yeah. His phone bill. So it was an extraordinary event to meet Krishnaji, and also, I mean, my main reason was here to learn from him. And on various occasions, I'll have to submit you to this, because I'll read some poems that I wrote about Krishnaji and for Krishnaji. So I hope you'll bear with it. But okay, here, since I'm talking about it, I may as well read you one. And this one actually was, you may have seen it if you've ever seen the 100-Year Book. You've heard of the 100-Year Book of Krishnamurti. It was published on the occasion of, and we still have copies of it here, on the occasion of its 100th birth anniversary in 1995. So he would have been 100 years old. Of course, he died 10 years earlier. And it was put together by Evelyn Blau, who was a trustee. And she's actually still alive. She's, 97 now this year. Wonderful lady. She moved from Bel Air to be with her daughter in Acton. And anyways, long and short, and if you've seen, by the way, if you've seen the exhibit in the pavilion, that was put together by Evelyn Blau, So she's done extraordinary work, not only putting that book together, also The Challenge of Change, which is sort of a biographical film about Krishnamurti, and then that exhibit. Then she edited a number of books like Meditation and so on. Anyways, the 100-Year Book consists of a great number of people. There must be probably 100 or 150. Sorry, what? Yes, as I mentioned, she's 90. She'll be 97 this year. She'll be She lives in Acton, east of Los Angeles, in the desert highlands there. And then she was kind enough to interview me or ask me to contribute something, which I did. And I wrote an article on Krishnaji's humor, which I thought was so extraordinary. And apropos that, I think a footnote is maybe worthwhile. There was a film that was made about Krishnamurti's life, the last year of his life, in England at Brockwood Park by an independent TV station, and it was called The Role of a Flower, and it's a half-hour program, and it's really wonderfully done. And some of the visitors to his talks there, they were interviewed, why do you go there, and so on. And then they interview Krishnamurti, and so on, and just sort of give a very brief sketch of his life. And at one point during the interview, Krishnamurti mentions his emphasis on seriousness, that he always emphasizes seriousness. And what does he mean by seriousness? Well, he means, and then he clarified that by saying, seriousness for me means to go to the very end of something. Not break up halfway, but go to the very end of it, find out completely. And I don't know how that came up. And then he said, oh yeah, that's how it came up. And then he said, because seriousness doesn't mean just churchy serious, meaning on Sundays only, but seriousness includes the sense of humor. Which was something unusual. Seriousness includes the sense of humor, the capacity to laugh at oneself, the capacity to laugh at one's own situation in the world and all these things that happen. Not to make fun of misery or pain in among humanity and all the horrible wars and all that, clearly not. But there is another angle when you look at yourself and you think, my God, what is this? And you laugh at yourself. And there's a certain freedom in that, humor, the intelligence of humor. So he certainly emphasized that. And so then Evelyn, who put that book together, which includes articles and interviews by famous celebrities, George Bernard Shaw, Henry Miller, a whole long list, but there are also less known folks mentioned in the book, like myself and others, and actually even a guy who was in jail, who was somehow affected by Krishnamurti and his life was changed by Krishnamurti. So anyways, but not only did I write this article on humor, but thankfully Evelyn included a poem of mine that I had written about, I think it was just about 5 years after Krishnamurti's passing, after his death in '86. So, and I was in France at the time, in southern France, and I entitled the poem, "Thank You, Sir." Actually, I better put glasses on, otherwise I can't read my own poetry. Thank you, sir. Whoever you were, whatever you were, thank you for having touched my life. Much rarer, more unique, more splendid than Halley's comet, more like the sun, the moon, and all the stars rolled into one glorious event. Perhaps I cannot claim and say, yes, I have been changed, been transformed at the root, the wellspring of my being, of my consciousness. But thank you for having touched my life with your presence, with your smile, your laughter, with your friendship, with which was but sheer love and compassion. Thank you for having touched my life. And the teachings, majestic, impersonal, star bright, a beacon for all humanity for many, many years to come. Thank you, sir. And thank you. And the comment on Halley's comet was because I think it was just that year that Halley's comet was passing close to the Earth in the solar system. So okay. So now I'd like to present you with a few things that I found out. Oh, by the way, let me just tell you, of course, I'm not really an educator, but I did teach at a number of schools. One in Laos, Southeast Asia, I taught there for a little while. And then also in Japan, I taught there for half a year or so. And then I did teach at Oak Grove School, but also just sort of a choice class. You could subscribe to it. It was modern, what did I call it? Current world affairs. That's right. It was a history class, you know, and it maybe 2 times a week I teach this, and I enjoyed that tremendously to be able to do that, and then and I mean I've given other classes, cooking classes and so on. So, but I don't really consider myself a teacher in the conventional sense, because I went to college, yes, but I never got a degree. And actually, here, I got to tell you this story. That's very funny. And it was sort of the last year of Krishnamurti's life. And at that time, there were some changes made in the structure of the teaching and classing and so on. And I wasn't part of the meetings, but he came for lunch over there, and he, as he usually did, he would enter the kitchen first, and he'd say, "And you, sir, you will be teaching." Oh, wow, really? But I said, "But wait a minute, Krishnaji, I don't have any credentials. I can't. I don't know if I can do that, you know." And he said, "Don't worry, sir. You've got a PhD from Rishi Valley." I was always proud of that. And actually, then I mean, not long after he passed away, and I did teach at the middle school level, which I'd never done before, for only 1 semester. I was just not cut out for it, and nor were the students cut out for me. So, but it was an interesting experience, you know. And so, so anyways, so I've had a little experience with that, and here I'd like to present to you some ideas about this. And this one is I think it's from Life Ahead, so that's one of Krishnamurti's book, and he's talking about teaching, and he mentioned this often. And here's the quote from Krishnamurti: "Teaching is the noblest profession, if it can be called a profession at all. It is an art that requires not just intellectual attainments, but infinite patience and love. To be truly educated is to understand our relationship to all things, to money, to property, to people, to nature, in the vast field of our existence." So that's apropos teaching. And teaching, of course, is directly related to learning, you know. Teaching is meant to bring about learning. And that's, of course, the whole subtext or the essence of education, you know. And usually, if you look at the root meaning of education, it comes from Latin, Greek, and all that. And education or educate basically means to bring up, to rear, educate, to train, foster. So in many respects, of course, and I think that's a general concept when you talk about education to somebody. Well, it's about kids, you know, and of course, in essence, that's the main topic, the main purpose is to train, to foster, to bring up children, you know, so that they can function in the world, that they learn a skill, that they can be independent and know their way around, they know the language, they know the numbers and all the rest of it, you know. Of course, that's clear. But that often one might describe that as the imparting of information, you know. And there's, of course, for Krishnamurti, there's that other, much more subtle aspect of education and teaching and learning, which is if you have a classroom situation between a teacher and students, you have also a psychological relationship between the teacher and the student, And he emphasizes that very much. Unless there is a feeling of trust between the teacher and the student, forget all the other stuff, Then it becomes, as it usually does, competition, comparison, and you don't really care for the teacher. He's just this guy who's an authority, And of course, that's the point that Krishnamurti, I think, is making in regard to education. Is it possible to educate, to impart that information without that authoritarian aspect, Actually, we were gonna. What's the time thing? Okay, let's do a wonderful understanding yourself and the world, which is totally an aspect of education. So, and now we have these wonderful programs done by Francisco, this gentleman here standing there, who's responsible for the program is the immeasurable, wonderful 3 minute, right? There are about eight or so programs of the immeasurable. Look it up on the internet, on our website, and so on. They're all really extraordinary, And you'll see, and it's his doing primarily, So let's have a look at that. Okay. Can you see? You okay?
We seem to think that our life, the daily life one leads, is something separate, away from the whole world of travail, misery, confusion. We think the individual, the you, is different from the rest of the world. The world, with all its atrocities, wars, inequality and injustice. When you look little more closely, then you will see what you are, your daily life, what you think, what you feel, is the external world. You are the world. You are the human being that has made this world, the world so utterly in disorder, the world that is crying in great sorrow, helpless. It is you, the human being, have built this world. So that world outside you is not different from the world in which you live, your world, your private life. So, in bringing about a radical change in the human being, in you, in the individual, you are naturally bringing about a radical change in the structure and the nature of society, which means the individual, the you, the human being, has to go into the whole structure of himself. One must understand oneself, how you are made, both biologically as well as psychologically. If you want to think rationally, sanely, you have to know yourself. You have to search out the causes of why you do certain things, why you are aggressive, brutal, acquisitive, dominating, possessive, which are all the causes of conflict between human beings. It's only by seeing actually what is taking place in your life, observing it very closely, without any condemnation, then you will discover for yourself that the mind can be free.
So this is really a very good way of presenting some of these very important notions of Krishnamurti and his teachings, you know. And so, if I can take that, and let's see, where am I now with this? Oh yeah, I'd like to read something from, I don't know, I mean, I think you probably know that Krishnamurti, there are so many titles. Have you ever looked how many titles there are of Krishnamurti's? I don't have the exact number, how many books have his name. I mean, even if you just start from when he dissolved the Order of the Star and left the Theosophical Society and went on his own, 1929 or 30, you know. So if you start there and go till today, there are probably between 80 and 100 titles, you know. But of course, only a few of them are not, well, relative few, maybe 15 or not more than 20, I would say, were really composed by him, handwritten by him, you know. And of course, the two books that were definitely written by him and have that format is, you know, the diaries, Krishnamurti's notebook, Krishnamurti's journal, and then lastly, Krishnamurti to himself. Now here's, along that line that he mentions here about understanding yourself and understanding the world, I came upon this particular passage in this journal here, which just struck me so profoundly that I often like to, you know, I made a copy of it, and I often quote it as sort of the essence of what Krishnamurti is talking about. And this is in this book, if you ever look it up and want to read more about it, on page 35, entry for September 24, 1973. And so and I leave out, you know, the first portion, the first paragraph. But here's a passage that I found so striking. One has to be a light to oneself. This light is the law. There is no other law. All other laws are made by thought, and so fragmentary and contradictory. To be a light to oneself is not to follow the light of another, however reasonable, logic, historical, and however convincing. You cannot be a light to yourself if you are in the dark shadow of authority, of dogma, of conclusion. Morality is not put together by thought. It is not the outcome of environmental pressure. It is not of yesterday, of tradition. Morality is the child of love. And love is not desire and pleasure. Sexual or sensory enjoyment is not love. And then he describes the mountains, but then he returns to this subject a little later. Freedom is to be a light to oneself. Then it is not an abstraction, a thing conjured by thought. Actual freedom is freedom from dependency, attachment, from the craving for experience. Freedom from the very structure of thought is to be a light to oneself. In this light, all action takes place, and thus it is never contradictory. Contradiction exists only when that law, light, is separate from action, when the actor is separate from action. The ideal, the principle, is the barren movement of thought and cannot coexist with this light. One denies the other. This light, this law, is separate from you. Where the observer is, this light, this love is not. The structure of the observer is put together by thought, which is never new, never free. There is no how, no system, no practice. There is only the seeing, which is the doing. You have to see, not through the eyes of another. This light, this law, is neither yours nor that of another. There is only light. This is love. I think that's so strikingly beautiful and so poignant, and I think it really captures the essence of what he's saying, you know. More than any, I mean, not more than anything else. There may be other phrasings. I mean, the other phrasing that I often quote when people ask me about what does he really teach, and it's often not that easy to put into words if somebody has never read or heard of Krishnamurti. So, you know, so another way of putting this, I sometimes say you have to find out for yourself. You know, that's another way of putting it. Nobody can tell you, nobody can give you the truth. You know. And so, can you stand another poem? Okay. So this one I wrote a little later. Let's see if I found it. Here we are. Okay, this one is called Be Still. Be still. Say, I am the whole of life, and remain still. And keep on snoring. Okay, I'll start afresh. Don't fall asleep now. Say, I am the whole of life, and remain still. Consider how you look at the things and events all around you. Contemplate that you are the perceptions, feelings, and thoughts that unceasingly come and go within you, and be still. Say, I'm all this, all that I see and hear and touch, all that life is, all that is I. Be still and be watchful. Observe the rising and passing away of sensations, feelings, pleasures and fear, likes and dislikes. Be still and listen to the movement in which there is neither coming nor going. So, as you can tell, this hints a little bit at, watching. And of course, Krishnaji emphasized that, to watch, to be, to observe, and he phrased that wonderful term, choiceless awareness, as you probably have heard, which is exactly that, to observe without judgment, without choice, without saying good, bad, should be or shouldn't be. And actually, there is another kind of passage that I like to read to you, and it's from a talk he gave many years ago in Madras, and I think it was in 1956. And somebody asked him a funny question. Somebody asked him, and I won't read you the whole answer, because it's a bit lengthy otherwise. But this was just around Christmas time in 1956 in Madras. And the questioner says, "You were born in a village of very poor environment, and you say that you have never studied the scriptures. What good karma has brought you to this liberation?" And of course, Krishnamurti often emphasized, particularly in India, where, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas, they're always seen, well, like in Christianity in the West, the Bible and all that, it's the Word of God, it's the truth, a form of the truth. So he kept saying, usually during talks, he would say, "Look, I've never read any of the scriptures. In fact, here I can tell you another funny story. That this is a table story." So everybody had heard this many times over. I've never read any scriptures, and he meant, of course, looking for truth or finding a way and an answer or so on. So once at the lunch table, we were talking about various things in the Bible and so on. And he said, "Yeah, the King James Bible is really wonderful language." And everybody goes, "What? Did you read the Bible, Krishnaji?" Well, he said, "Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't, I like the language, it's just like poetry and so on." And then he proceeded, at one time he knew the whole thing by heart, which is the Song of Solomon. I don't know if some of you have ever read that. It's a love poem, really, and he started reciting that thing, and he just said, "Well, I didn't read it to find the truth. I'd never considered it the Word of God or anything like that." So one finds that often with Krishnaji, I must say. If you insist on this literalness, there's always some deviation, because often he speaks from the context, from the place where he's at. One has to take that into consideration. And so here, answering this question that was just put, he goes into it and sort of starts out by saying, "This is really a very interesting question if you care to go into it. Not because it is personal, but apart from the personal altogether." And then he gets to this point here, which I found another most striking example of his teaching in a very direct sense. And what he says, "But if you really want to know, then you will have to find out for yourself whether there is a reality which can be," and here in this sense he uses reality almost in the sense of truth, which he did at that time in the 50s. "But if you really want to know, then you will have to find out for yourself whether there is a reality which can be understood immediately and not through the process of time. There is a reality, please listen, sirs, there is a reality which, coming upon the mind, transforms it. You don't have to do a thing. It operates, it functions, it has a being of its own. But the mind must feel it, must know it, and not speculate, not have all kinds of ideas about it. A mind that is seeking it will never find it. But there is that state, unquestionably. In saying this, I am not speculating, nor am I stating it as an experience of yesterday. It is so. There is that state, and if you have it, you will find everything is possible, because that is creation, that is love, that is compassion. But you cannot come to it through any means, through any book, through any guru or organization. Do please realize that you cannot come to it through any means. No meditation will lead you to it. When you realize that no sanctions, no pattern of behavior, no guru, no book, no organization, no authority can lead you to that state, you have already got it. Then you will find that the mind is merely an instrument of that creation. And it is that creation operating through the mind that will bring about a totally different world, not the planned world of the politician or the religious social reformer, because that creation is its own reality, its own eternity. I don't know if that speaks to you, but I was so struck when that's why I read it to you, because I discovered this long ago by chance, and it just, I found it so poignant and directly to the point, because it answers a lot of questions implicitly, of course, that nobody can give it to you, not even Krishnamurti, he's pointing at it, but you got to do the rest of it, you got to do yourself, So, let's see, what's the timing again now? Is it close to, what? 4:36, okay. So we have a little more time, if you're patient with me. And let's see, I wanted to show you this thing here, which is along the same line that I just mentioned, where he talks about this, nothing can ever bring you to it. And it's a similar kind of a statement that he made in England, where he had these dialogues there all the time. And let's see if I find this thing here in this chaos. Here we go. It's from 1961, so it's a few years later, and this is part of a dialogue, and it's just the last portion of a answer that he gave. And he says, and then you will see that when you go around the corner in the wood, you will meet the everlasting. Not only in the wood, but in the filthy street. And so the mind that journeyed into itself, into the very depths of itself, without holding back, the journey within, which is not the reaction to the outer, it's the same movement. Inward looking, inward going. The mind is not anything apart from that which is sublime. Therefore, all search, all seeking, all longing comes to an end. And again, I found that very striking and
good selection of material that you
Oh, thank you. Okay, then, of course, he would often emphasize nature, that we are part of nature, that we're even animals, sophisticated animals, but and that's of course what also education deals with. And so I wrote this poem. Actually, I wrote it originally in Switzerland, in Sarnen, 1971. So when I first heard Krishnamurti speak in Sarnen, and the title of the poem is Earth Beloved. And I mention, I don't know if you know these figures. Orpheus, you may have heard of Orpheus, the mythical figure from Greece, ancient Greece, who invented song and music. And you know the blind Greek. You know who the blind Greek is? The blind Greek is Homer, the author of the Iliad and Odyssey. And then to the troubadour. Well, you've heard of troubadours. Okay, and so it's Earth Beloved. Earth Beloved, whose voice can truly sing you? Whose voice, vast like the wind, can praise you enough? Maybe Orpheus, or maybe the blind Greek, or perhaps of our recent immortals, a troubadour, or an alchemist of sound who makes the stones hum, so that the ore at their depth center blossoms into garnets and fruits of sparkling crystal. You touch us deeply where it counts, at the wordless core of our being where you dwell. We are the human race who strut about on your face, counting all in sight as ours, defining, naming, and explaining everything beneath the sun and beyond. Through foolish pride of worldwide ownership, we obscure the source of it all. But at rare times, your loveliness reminds us of a beauty beyond measure, of a vastness without name. You are a sapphire and white pearl, floating in star-bright emptiness. You are home, and you are all that we are, source of our dreams and awakenings. Earth Beloved. So, thank you very much, thank you. If you have any questions or anything, I'll be glad to. Sorry, what? Oh, no, please. That's totally accepted. We've seen it. Oh, good. That's a good thing.
That book you wrote, I had been reading Krishnamurti for quite a while before I came upon that. And that was a great book. I mean, it humanized him in a beautiful way.
Thank you.
Yes, I have the Kitchen Chronicles.
That's it, yeah.
Yes. I would recommend it for anybody who hasn't.
Okay, everybody hear this? Thank you. Well, good. If you have no other questions, then this is the moment to say, wow, this was such a great annual gathering, and it was lovely for you to be here and listen to me. And I appreciate your presence and your attention. Yeah. And I hope you'll come next year. Okay, good. Promise? Thank you.